I had always wanted or assumed, and I'm sure Richard Wittes, who was my main colleague at first, felt the same, that we needed a mix of actual live music making and scholarship about music. And these are two quite different things in many places. So a lot of universities, traditional Western music departments, they have, you take your cello lessons, or you have to do some instrumental lessons, at least piano, but you can instead focus on history, the operas of Mozart or something. And I thought all of our students should have to have a good mix of this, and we've always managed to be able to do that. So first year undergrads were always required to take a performance course of some kind. In fact, very early we decided that would be Javanese gamelan, and later we throw Bali in now too. They do a term of Javanese, Balinese. The reason being those are ensemble traditions where you have to learn without notation most of the time, until you finally discover it exists when your teacher admits it. You have to learn orally, which is an important thing, and you have to learn by listening to the other members of the group. It's a little more like jazz to a certain degree, but it's a music you've had probably no experience of before. So you are playing some instrument, and how do you know when to change to a different part? You have to hear a signal from this or that instrument. A different instrument is signaling you, and it really forces you to be social musically. It's not like suddenly you're a party guy and you really relate to all these people as good humans. It's just you really learn to think about music as an interaction with other people. So that was great. Never mind that after that, of course, by second year, some of them want to focus on, let's say, the mbira or something, one East African instrument or whatever, or the shakuhachi or whatever. That's okay. We were able to eventually get the school to give us, for any student doing a music degree, an undergrad could get, I think it was about £300 a year, that's going back 20 years by now, to pay for lessons with an approved teacher who didn't have to be at SOAS, because we couldn't hire all these. But if you're a shakuhachi fanatic, there was a guy available nearby enough. We'll give you this much to arrange lessons with him, and at the end you have to take a performance exam. And we don't expect you to suddenly be a great player, but this was another issue I'll mention about how to evaluate performance on non-Western instruments. Anyhow, we got them to do that, and for master students, I think they gave us $350 for undergrads and $500 for master students to pay for performance lessons. So you could get a mix of scholarly course taking, listening to blah 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 lectures by people like me, reading books, listening to recordings, and then actually learning to play some music. I think that was so crucial, and it worked. So that went
new?
where I
that
wanted.
Wasn't something that was
Well, when I moved in there was no performance officially. I'm pretty sure of that. Richard Wittes, back in '87, he was doing lectures, and he would get them in class a bit to perform, but nobody was teaching instruments, and there was no budget to allow that to happen. It didn't mean if you were fanatic enough you couldn't go out and find a teacher nearby, but it finally worked out. And it could be done performance 1 and 2. Performance 1 was the required first-year undergrad course, Gamelan. Performance 2 and 3, if you wanted to do them, that's where we gave you a little money each year to find a teacher that we would have to approve. And usually those 2 and 3, if you did both years, had to be building on the same tradition rather than suddenly just tasting another one. But we're not that picky. And I think I'm not as much in touch with the department now in questions about that. Finance, I don't want to hear this stuff anymore, but I do sometimes. But basically, it's still happening. They still have performance teachers. A lot of the same ones we've had for 15, 20 years, which is wonderful. The one interesting thing, we have a TQA, they call it Teaching Quality Assessment. I think they still use that term. Every 5 years or so, depending on their mood, the government wants to check every university in the country. They send around people on a committee to talk to the head of the department and others and observe classes and ask you questions to see how is the quality of your teaching. And this includes some student feedback to them and stuff. And one of the things they wondered about was, for our performance exams, how did we evaluate them? Did we have a clear bunch of criteria? And it really was a struggle for us for a while to convince them of this. It depended who the TQA people were. 1 year of the many, I think 3 or 4 times I was there when they were doing this, 3 times. once one of the people coming was an ethnomusicologist like me, someone who actually is aware of what's the difference between doing the received Western classical music, world music, and doing the rest of the world. Western classical, you've got grade 8 piano, you've got grade 6 violin, whatever, all these different instruments. They've been going on for so long and so formally that you know exactly what you have to do to achieve a certain level. But our people come into SOAS. Why do they come to SOAS? Some of them say, as an undergrad, well, you know, I was interested in music and I heard this, I had a friend who was from Japan and she did this dance or sang something, and wow. Or someone else says, I don't know, I just thought Africa was kind of weird. I thought I'd want to know about Africa. They've said things like this. Or they were really in love with some music, or they actually had played a little of one, or who knows what. They all came for different reasons, but only a few of them had had any experience of performing on any of these instruments. Now, one of them who did Congolese guitar, he was already a great guitar player, but he'd never played Congolese guitar. How do we then examine, and let's take shakuhachi as an example, bamboo flute, and blown Japan. So hard, when I took my first lesson, dragged along by this Japanese friend back in 1970, knowing nothing about it really, it's a very hard instrument to get a sound out of. Even for a Japanese, of course, but I only knew my own experience. I go into the class, there's like 8 other students there, they pass me the shakuhachi, give it a try. And what do? No sound is coming out except me hyperventilating, you know, and they're all laughing like crazy. This happens to every first timer, unless, however, they have already played a Western flute or something. And then the technique is so close that they can get a good sound out of it. So we have to figure out how to examine shakuhachi people when they take lessons. Individual lessons, they're not in a class together at SOAS. They go and have a private lesson with this teacher. If they're already good wind players, they're probably going to sound really good after 1 year. If they have never played a flute before, or a trumpet even, they're going to sound like crap after a year. So this was a real struggle to convince the government's teaching quality assessment people that you do not examine the shakuhachi like you do the piano. And they really thought this was wrong for a while. So that was an interesting problem of admin. I'm not sure what the current situation is, but by the last time we had to fight through this battle, they didn't penalize us for this. They recognized the point, but they still, one of them at least of the Western world, I can see his face now, was saying, you know, well, you really have to think this through and figure out how to make your standards more transparent, you know. Just like when you're talking about your external examiner wants to know, how do you decide who gets a first or a 2-1 or a 2-2 degree, all these different classes of degree. You know, it's supposed to be the same for every university, although it isn't. So how do you decide who gets a good mark for playing shakuhachi? How do you give this person a first, even though it didn't sound very good to me? Well, they worked so hard and they improved so much. It's the level of improvement. Well, how does an external examiner examine that and confirm that you got it right? Not my problem, buddy. We're the ones who know. You know, if you don't have more universities that have people who know this kind of world music, you should be ashamed and you should change the system and get more people who can do this. Otherwise, leave it to us to decide this, you know. Anyhow, there are a lot of incidents like that popped up over the years. As the thing here is that SOAS was, unlike any of the other universities around the London area, we were the only people doing these traditions. King's College, eventually, they had Kofi Agawu from Ghana, who was a Schenker analysis guy. This is super Western analysis, don't even ask me about it. And he was totally Western classical, but he eventually was the one, maybe he was the one who wanted us to teach their students. They would send their first year undergrads down to learn about world music from us every year. And eventually he realized he's African. Why doesn't he know anything about African music? So he eventually started learning about Ghanaian music and wrote a little about it, and eventually kind of created a book about African music, which was, he criticized, for example, a guy, this is personal but no problem at all, Peter Cook, wonderful scholar, British, of music from Uganda. Super wonderful. And Agawa was kind of challenging Peter Cook's interpretation of some Ugandan music, which Kofi Agawa knows nothing about. He's a sweet guy, Kofi, I like him, but he was criticizing for the wrong reasons. Okay, he was down there at King's College, the only guy representing the rest of the world at King's College. Now they have about 3 or 4 ethnomusicologists. At least one is a graduate of SOAS, PhD. And now they teach world music. More and more places have an element of this in their program now, so it's not as hard as it was in the old days to find external examiners who could judge you and things like this. But we, in those early days, really struggled often to convince other places of how wonderful and unique SOAS was. And, oh, unique, sure, you guys do this weird music, you know, and your music, they don't have notation and stuff. Well, how do you know? There's notation in Japan from the 8th century for court music. What do you mean they don't have notation? They're using almost the same notation today for court music. Anyhow, it was such a difficult time in the early days with SOAS being so unique, so special. Now most departments do have people in them, music departments throughout the country, who know something about this, even if when it comes to hiring a new staff member, they're not quite sure they want to hire an ethnomusicologist. Sometimes you see an ad, we need a new music person. It could be someone doing ethnomusicology, someone doing popular music, which is more and more on the horizon now, which is interesting too, and that's fine. Or somebody doing 18th century classical music. Interesting choice. You often get this kind of thing, you know. And they're looking for the best candidate, and they think they have needs in all 3 areas. I guess the main point of this particular blab is that SOAS was so unique. It was perfect for me. I don't know enough about Western classical to have gotten a job in a department where my first role would have been to teach keyboard in the first year to people and sight reading, and then on the side teach a little world music. SOAS was the only place in England almost at that time that I could have got such a job. And it happened that Richard Wittes, the only real music person there who was making this happen and got the money when they hired me, was a neighbor of mine in Cambridge. He commuted down from there, and he knew who I was. I was on the radar for a lot of reasons, so that was a lot of luck. But SOAS was such a special place because of its uniqueness in those days. We're less unique now, but we're still super important, and I hope we survive the current financial situation, which is impacting other universities too, but SOAS right now is really going through some struggles. Because it's our 100th anniversary, I think they're delaying, as they celebrate the next few months, they're delaying making any really hard economic decisions. Possibly a year from now it could get really ugly there, I don't know. And I don't know what that'll mean for music, nor does anyone in music know really. So I was there at the best possible time as SOAS developed into not just an isolated place. We were special, but we no longer were so unique that the rest of the country thought, what crap, who cares about that stuff, you know. King's College now hires their own ethnomusicologists. I remember the early days, one of their students, when I was teaching them, they'd come down in around 1989, and I forced them all to play a little Gamelan, one of the first classes, to see what it was like. And afterwards, one of the first-year undergrads, age 19 or so, violinist type down there, she said, tell me, teacher, do the Indonesians really like this music? And I thought, well, it's a fair question. If that's really on your mind, in other words, you don't like it. Well, why should you? Do you think they would like Beethoven the first time they heard him, for example? If so, why don't they have a major conservatoire in Indonesia now? You know, with 190 million people there, and Dutch colonial era. Why aren't they doing this? So, okay, fair question. But do you think they like Beethoven? That was one answer I tried on them, and then I said, okay, if they didn't like this music, why do you think these very fancy bronze instruments, beautifully made, beautiful stands, complicated music, too complicated for you to understand at the moment, why would this exist? And she struggled even to get through that bit, you know. That's fair enough. But I think now, fortunately, thanks to internet and various other things, globalization in general, it's much rarer for someone, even a total Western music fanatic, not to have some awareness of the rest of the world and not to have some other music they've heard that they actually thought wasn't bad. I think in that sense, it's easier to teach ethnomusicology than it was in my early days. So that's an interesting diversion from whatever path I was on now. So SOAS has gone from being totally unique to a little more normal and still wonderful. No other place but us really focuses only on Asian and African music, including diaspora like Cuban music and stuff, and including piano and guitar traditions. You know, we're not picky about the instruments, but we're still unique in that sense of being focused. But at least now the students who come to us are usually more aware of the musics they've come to study. It's not just, oh, well, Africa, yeah, it's kind of weird, I thought I'd try Africa, you know. It's more like, boy, I really love the sound of the mbira or the kora, you know, and I've always wanted to try one. And I found out on the internet that that's the other good thing. I've heard recordings of, you know, your Lucy Duran playing the kora, or I've heard the album of the students that you put out, playing all these different musics. It's a different world now, and so that's good and bad. The only bad thing for SOAS, aside from general financial downturn, is we have more competitors now.